Greetings, my lovelies. This is Blake here, and welcome to my review of Godzilla 2014. Now, for those who watch Critiquing the Critics, you should know that I am a huge Godzilla nerd. I say nerd, not fanboy, because I take my obsession over Godzilla far beyond any normal fanboy would. I mean, as a kid, I collected all the toys, I read the books, I read the comic books, I watched all the movies, and in some cases, I watched a single Godzilla movie multiple times within a day. I remember when I was really young, I got up and I turned on the TV and saw that there was a Godzilla marathon going on, and I had to watch it, so I sat down and literally stayed there watching Godzilla movies all the way up until I went to bed later that night. That is just how much I am in love with this franchise. And it's strange because my first Godzilla experience was Godzilla 1985. I must have been like 9 years old, and I was around Halloween, and I fell in love with it. It was everything that I would have wanted at the time. I was already a big, I was a huge fan of dinosaur movies, of course, and Godzilla pretty much was a dinosaur in my mind at that time, and it was pretty much a horror movie too, and even at such a young age I really adored the horror genre, so giant monster plus horror equals a very happy young Blake. But unfortunately there wasn't many Godzilla movies at my local video store. In fact, all I remember is Godzilla 1985, so I didn't have my next Godzilla experience until that Christmas. I got up Christmas morning, I saw the Christmas tree, and on the ground stood that big Godzilla toy that you see in some of my Critiquing the Critics videos, and in the toy's arms was a VHS tape, which promptly became my second Godzilla experience. And what was that VHS tape, you may ask? It was Godzilla's Revenge, baby! Oh yeah, I went from one of the most well-made, dark, and gritty Godzilla films to one of the shoddiest, silliest, most child-friendly Godzilla films. And you know what? I must have liked it because I continue to own the VHS tape, and I've owned many Godzilla tapes over time, and they've all deteriorated in some way or another. But I continued watching Godzilla movies, but I really wish I remembered what I felt about the sudden shift in tone, going from a horror film to a kid's movie. It's times like that I really do regret my really poor memory, although I should be grateful that I even remember this event, considering I barely remember what I did yesterday. But just goes to show how much I love Godzilla. Now I won't go into my feelings towards every single Godzilla movie, but I will discuss each of the different eras and what I feel about them as a whole. So it started off with the Showa era, which began with Gojira, which was Americanized into Godzilla King of the Monsters, and ended with Terror of Mechagodzilla during the mid-late 70s. So it lasted about 20 years, and it's automatically the era that fans tend to embrace the most, just because it's what made Godzilla into an icon, warts and all, and it's the era we pretty much grew up with. But the problem I have with the Showa era is that it seemed like the studios weren't really sure whether they wanted to make a respectable franchise or a cheap cash grab franchise, so it'd go back and forth between good movie, bad movie. But in terms of my judgment towards most of those films, whenever I go back and watch them, it usually just depends on their nostalgic value to me. So, for example, I grew up watching Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla quite often. So when I went back and I watched Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, I really enjoyed it just because it's such a big part of my childhood. Believe it or not, same with this. Yeah, I definitely see a bad movie here, even though it is kind of funny when you watch it with the perspective that the main character, who I believe his name is Chiro, that he grows up to be a serial killer who kills people because Manila tells him to. Seriously, watch that movie, and if it's not the vivid hallucinations he has while he's being chased down by freaking bank robbers, it's the fact that all the adult characters seem to acknowledge that there's something really, really wrong with them. But I enjoy the film because, once again, it is a major part of my childhood. Now, other films that are very well received by members of the franchise that I did not grow up with as much, they didn't hold up very well when I watched them again, such as Destroy All Monsters, King Kong vs. Godzilla, and Terror of Mechagodzilla. Yeah, they're much, much better than this, but because they don't have that nostalgic value to me, it's just I see them as very average monster movies. They represent everything that I dislike about Toho, even though technically this represents it more. It just because I didn't grow up with them, I just didn't really care for them as much. I much prefer the Heisei era of Godzilla films. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. That began with Godzilla, or The Return of Godzilla, which was Americanized into Godzilla 1985, and ended with Godzilla vs. Destroya, just because it seemed like at that point Toho wanted to make a respectable franchise. So they put a lot more money and time into each and every individual film, so you had a lot better special effects, cooler monster suits. There was a lot more original Godzilla villains who had really unique designs. I enjoyed those movies from beginning to the end. The only one I did not like was Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, or Ghidorah, however you pronounce his name. My favorite, though, is definitely The Return of Godzilla. That I just love that movie. And after that, of course, you had the American Godzilla movie, and fans hate the American Godzilla movie. I don't. I think it's passably entertaining, even though I will concede that, yeah, it probably shouldn't be considered a Godzilla flick, and yeah, it is pretty stupid. But if I'm in the right mood, I can enjoy it. My biggest problem with the American Godzilla movie is its impact, the impact it had on subsequent Toho films. And it's weird because Toho claims to have hated the American Godzilla movie, but yet the American Godzilla film influenced it so much in all the following Toho Godzilla films. Now, the Millennium era began with Godzilla 2000 and ended with Godzilla 2000, or Godzilla Final Wars, which ended only like 4 years later, or 4 or 5 years later. So it had the longest reign, and in my opinion, the films just weren't very good. I will say that I enjoyed Godzilla 2000, and I especially did like Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, All Out Monster Attack. I hate that title, love the movie. But otherwise, I can't really tell the difference between either of the Mechagodzilla movies, and Godzilla Final Wars is just kind of annoying, while Godzilla vs. Megaguirus is kind of just boring. But the problem is that, you know, since the American Godzilla movie was such a big financial hit, Toho started using more CGI, and they lacked the resources to pull it off. And even though the American Godzilla movie hasn't aged very well in terms of its CGI, it's still much better than what Toho would pull off itself when it came to computer-generated effects. Or, the sense of humor became a lot campier, and I noticed, they kept rebooting the franchise over and over again. And maybe it's just me, but it just seemed like there was so much about the Millennium era that kept reminding me of Emmerich's 1998 Godzilla film, and that annoyed me because Toho just couldn't pull it off. And then it died. I think general audiences noticed how Toho seemed to lack confidence in their own franchise, and so they stopped watching Godzilla movies. And 10 years later, we have this new 2014 Godzilla flick. God damn, I spent a lot of time setting this up. My justification for that is how this Godzilla movie spends a lot of time setting up its main battles, so yeah, that was totally intentional. Anyway, my biggest concern in regards to this movie was if it's not good, if it flops, then they're not going to make any more Godzilla movies, and I want them to continue making more Godzilla movies. But if it's a success, is Toho going to become insecure once more and let it influence their own Godzilla movies? I don't want to see that. I want Toho to go back to at least the 90s days and make their own kind of Godzilla flicks. Don't worry about what the Americans are doing. Stick to what you know. Awesome looking monster suits. Use as little CGI as possible. Don't be so silly with a sense of humor, and stop rebooting the franchise after every single film. I hate it when any franchise does that, but you're doing it more than most. But when it came to the movie itself, I thought Godzilla 2014 was good. Not great, but I did think it was a solid Godzilla effort. It's definitely more of a Godzilla film than the previous American Godzilla film was. And I think that if you just look at it as a Godzilla film or as a giant monster movie, it's good either way. It has some exceptional moments, but I would say as a whole the film wasn't exceptional. So how should I even discuss this? Well, let's go ahead and break it down per act. Godzilla 2014 is much slower paced than most Godzilla films. It focuses more on the human characters, and it tries to incorporate the human characters more into the story itself, whereas in the Japanese Godzilla flicks, the humans tend to be reduced to just being spectators. I liked that. I thought that was pretty clever. I thought the characters were interesting enough, and I thought the actors were given enough to do to where they could become compelling and give me reasons to care for them. A lot of people have said otherwise. It's just my opinions there. I made a connection to these people. Whether you will or not is a totally different matter. So I thought it was interesting how the first act is really playing up a mystery. It plays out like a government conspiracy thriller, even though you know where it's going to go. I still thought it was executed well enough to where, you know, I was always invested. I wasn't getting impatient or bored with the film. And then once the Mutos show up during the second act, that's when the action really starts. And the Mutos seem to have a bigger role than Godzilla does, which is kind of strange. But the Mutos I thought were pretty cool looking. I liked the designs. They felt more like something Toho would do compared to, let's say, Pacific Rim, where, I don't know, I just thought they were kind of standard Hollywood giant monsters. Some people have disagreed with me about that. That's, once again, just my feelings when it comes to that. There's one of them that's a flyer that kind of looks like a hybrid between Rodan and the Gyos from the Gamera series. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right because I'm not a big Gamera person. But I actually thought, as a whole, this movie resembled Shusuke Kaneko's Gamera trilogy more than it did any of the Godzilla movies. I'd say the closest, if I had to pick a Godzilla movie, was The Return of Godzilla or Godzilla 1985. But even that's stretching it. And that's actually a good thing. I like the fact that in terms of just format, style, and how Godzilla is used, this film is very different from all of its predecessors, and I think that's a good thing. That's what's going to help this movie stand out, if it stands out at all. And then the other Muto, that actually looked a lot like the Cloverfield monster. But I thought it still looked really cool, and I thought the special effects rendered them very nicely. So throughout the bulk of the second act, you get primarily just, you know, cities being destroyed, and it's still kind of playing a juggling act between, you know, the characters and the monsters. But it's at this point, it's beginning to pick up speed, beginning to get some of that momentum, and I thought the special effects were always really good. Whether it was using a green screen, CGI, or even models, everything looked authentic. I never felt that the special effects looked like special effects when it came to, you know, the cities being destroyed. Now, Godzilla is a little bit more complicated because at times I did think he looked like a CGI character, but the CGI for the most part was really good. It definitely resembles Godzilla, but it's not identical to the Japanese Godzilla. Once again, I liked that. I don't feel like a Godzilla movie needs to cater or it needs to necessarily be a carbon copy of the previous Godzilla films. I like that it's doing the original Godzilla films justice, but it's also being its own movie. And Godzilla is kind of a mix between a force of nature and an anti-hero. Once again, it reminded me of Gamera from the Gamera trilogy that came out 10 years ago. But I do like how both Godzilla and the Mutos, they have their own personalities. I mean, the Mutos, they're very much a loving family unit. I don't know if that was a reference to the American Godzilla movie or not, but it actually made them kind of tragic because they're really just fighting for each other. And even though you know that, you know, if they succeed, that's going to probably mean the end of the human race, I still felt kind of bad for them. And you know, at times I even wondered if Godzilla was supposed to be the villain, and I felt that that was intentional. And Godzilla himself is pretty much, you know, a Godzilla. It's a character. He's not just a special effect. There's a certain nobility to him that I thought that they're almost like a charisma to that character, and that's really impressive when you consider this is technically it is a special effect. But you know, I thought that's one thing Toho always did well. It gave its monsters personalities. Gigan was always a dirty and violent coward. Anguirus was always kind of a dim-witted but very loyal and brave monster. And I thought that's one thing where Pacific Rim kind of faltered too. But this new Godzilla movie really did do a good job with that. But one thing I really did not like about this movie is that it's too much of a tease. It gives us radioactive blue balls. The first time it made me laugh where you had this awesome introductory shot of Godzilla. You know, he roars and you're like, oh, this is going to get epic. And then he starts fighting the one of the Mutos, and then it cuts away. And I will admit that made me laugh the way it was used. A lot of people did not find that funny, but I did. But afterwards they kept doing that over and over again. Really cool introductory shot for Godzilla. It starts to fight, then we cut away to something else. And I know that the director justified this by claiming that he wants to build up to the finale, but eventually it made the finale less exciting and just what was going on now more frustrating. I started to get irritated with the movie. But once it does reach the finale, yeah, it is definitely awesome. The fight scenes were really well choreographed. The special effects were definitely on the money. I liked how they make Godzilla really aggressive, pretty fast considering his bulk, but he's not like incredibly agile. He's still primarily just a big tank, and you know, but it's still his enemies had very different fighting styles, and you could see that during their battles. And you know, in terms of just sheer action, this might be the best Godzilla movie, even though as a whole it's not one of my favorites, even though I think it's once again a good one. And I thought there was some moments where the director really did nail the atmosphere, where some scenes were very chilling and even a little scary. My favorite part was when the paratroopers are jumping down and they go through the clouds and the smoke, and you see the ruins of the city, and then the monster battle taking place, and they're playing that music they play in the trailer that's just really haunting. That really did give me chills. And the music in general was very bombastic. A lot of people complained that it was too loud and noisy. I thought it was perfect. I wish they would have had a few more cues from Akira Ifukube's classic theme. To me, that's just so synonymous with Godzilla that they needed to have at least one moment where you were reminded of that. Instead, they started ripping off Jaws at one part. But still, overall, I really did like the score. The sound design, you know, very impactful. I loved Godzilla's roar. People freaking cheered in the theater when Godzilla would roar just because it was so impressive. I watched it in IMAX, and that just magnified everything from the special effects to the sound. Yeah, if you're going to see this movie in theater, try seeing it in IMAX. The 3D itself didn't really stand out, but the IMAX part definitely did. The big screen, I should say. Anything else I could say? Not really. I did like how it had its own thematic material. A lot of the imagery is reminiscent of when that the nuclear plant had a meltdown in Japan a few years ago, and another one reminds you of the tsunami. You might consider that tasteless, but people thought the original Godzilla was tasteless for, you know, having so much imagery surrounding the atomic bomb. So, I mean, it's something you might react to it badly. You might think that that makes this film have more substance. It's going to vary from person to person, but the only reason I don't think I was as enthusiastic is, once again, the teasing. That just started to get on my nerves, and I do agree that there needed to be more Godzilla. Even though I did like the human characters enough, I felt that they should have cut down some of the stuff like the main guy's wife, for example, and focus more on Godzilla, because that's what we want. But still, what we got still was pretty good, and I definitely think you should all watch it in the theaters, at least if you're a Godzilla fan. If you're an action movie fan who just wants a good spectacle, a good time at the movies, I'd still say, even if you're not a fan, you should check it out in theaters. Probably just as a matinee, though, to be safe. If you hate Godzilla, I still think you should watch this one just because it is so much more different. My dad is not a Godzilla fan, but he enjoyed this movie. But you might want to consider maybe a rental. I guess it just depends on you. I did do a written review. Please read that. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. I also did a written review of Wilderness, which is a horror thriller, and something else that I don't remember, I think. Go ahead and read whatever that is too. I think my next review will be the Chinese Zodiac with Jackie Chan. So I apologize for the length of this video. I love Godzilla so much that I have to just talk about him as much as I can. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys later.